Okay, we have time for one or two questions directly aimed at Matteo and for clarification of his talk. A general discussion we'll do, as I said, at the end of the three presentations. So are there any immediate requests for clarification to Matteo? All right, we're not going to wait. So we're going to do the, we're going to have more time at the end. And it's my great pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Antoinette Rouvroy. Antoinette is a doctor of law and a permanent research associate at the Belgian National Fund for Scientific Research. And again, research, a senior researcher at the Research Center of Information, Law and Society at the University of Namur. And she runs a blog called Algorithmic Governmentality, which I can only recommend to consult regularly. So please join me in welcoming Antoinette Rouvroy.
Thank you very much. Well, I will indeed speak about algorithmic governmentality, my initial title, which, well, I will be quite unfaithful to that title because I prefer not to have too much programming. But my initial title was Algorithmic Governmentality, a passion for the real and the exhaustion of the virtual. What I mean by algorithmic governmentality is, of course, inspired by governmentality studies initiated by Michel Foucault. And by governmentality, Foucault had in mind the study of the little subtle shifts in the way we produce knowledge, in the way we govern ourselves and govern others, that is, the way we shape the possible field of actions of others and of ourselves. And third, the way we become subjects, the process of subjectivation and individuation. So my departure question was, compared to what Michel Foucault has taught us about the different kinds of governmentality, state governmentality, sovereignty, discipline, and all these kinds of things, what happens in a world of big data and data mining and automatization of decisions and things like that? So my title could have been something else. It could have been reliability without truth, power without authority, and personalization without subjects or persons. This is just to show you the three kinds of shifts I would like to underline here. First, the way we produce knowledge. My idea is that big data and data mining plunges us into a new kind of paradigm. That's an ugly word to say that it's a very new way to produce what we hold collectively as the real, to produce the real, what counts as real for us. Well, a lot of people like Lacan, Pierre Legendre, etc., have shown us that as human beings, we only have access to the world through a lot of mediations. And the first mediation we have is language. But the idea or the ideology of big data is that we could at last access the world without any kind of mediation, directly in a language which is not a language, which is the degree zero of writing, which is a language of 1 and 0. So that's the passion of the real, passion for the real as such, which arises first. There is no conspiracy theory. Huh? First, there is the need to speed and to automatize the process of production of production of knowledge from data. Given the quantity, the complexity, the plasticity in growth of the data, we really needed, it was a real need to automatize and speed up the process of production of knowledge. But this has had a lot of consequences. It spurs us into what Baudrillard called a semiurgic society. That is, a semiurgic society in which science, or I would rather speak of signals rather than science, I will explain why just after this, where science take on a life of their own and constitute a new social order structured by models, codes, and science, well, I say signals. But in order to explain this, first of all, let's ask ourselves, what is a raw data? Raw data, it's the basic substance, is the food of algorithmic governmentality, if you wish. It can also be said to be the fundamental texture of capitalism as well, as a result of decodage. But raw data are really new semiotic objects. If you reflect and compare them to the classical categories of science, which are icons, and icons have meaning, or because of their resemblance to the thing they are supposed to represent. But here there is no resemblance between raw data and the thing, or we can ask ourselves whether there are things anymore, which they are supposed to represent. They don't have meaning by, just as traces have meaning, by a remembrance of a physical contact with the thing they are supposed to represent either. And they have no meaning as symbols, meaning that the meaning of raw data has no conventional basis, just as signals have conventional basis. If you have signals on the road, you know that you cannot pass, or you should stop, or you can go, because there has been a convention telling that this sign means that. So, in fact, raw data are just meaningless. So, despite the fact of having no meaning, they are highly calculable, so they correspond to what Umberto Eco calls signals. Signals are calculable, despite the fact, or because of the fact that they have no meaning. They have no meaning also for the persons themselves. They are not voluntary transcriptions in any way. And for that reason, I said that, in fact, algorithmic governmentality governs us like animals. Animals, according to Derrida, have the living beings, who are not allowed to respond. They have been called animals, and they cannot say, hey, no, I'm not an animal. So when you are profiled, you cannot say, hey, no, I'm not, I don't correspond to the profile. So it's really something quite new in this regard. So it's a result of a decoding. So decoding may disappear, in fact, as a process, and that's the ideology of big data. Big data, and in the big data ideology, which is a technical ideology. It's not a political ideology. It does not constitute any subject. It makes subjects disappear instead. In the technical ideology of big data, in fact, raw data is like nature. It's the idea that nature will speak by itself, or it's the idea that thanks to big data, the world speaks by itself without any transcription, any symbolization, any institutional mediation, or political or legal mediation. So that's really the idea that we arrive now to grasping the world without even words. But know what happens with that. In fact, it prevents us to speak, It's like Frédéric Neyrat said, we wouldn't speak not because all would have been said already, but because all would have been predicted, always already written, edited, but in a writing that would be the writing of things themselves, not the signature of things, but rather the signed things and the signosis, the disease of the nailed, fixed say, never removed from its eternity, stuck in a topos. So that's the idea of the signals and the indistinction between signals and things. And I think the reason why the dream of Bodigan didn't come so true is because of that new regime of indistinction. I will explain that a bit later. But in fact, raw data is the sophisticated result of a process of neutralization of meaning by disindexation, anonymization, decontextualization. The aim of the the production of raw data is to arrive to a rupture or a separation with all what would have any kind of meaning, in fact. So for that reason, we have the impression that all constructions, all algorithmic constructions fed by raw data would be completely objective, unbiased, absolutely fair in a way, treating everybody in the same way as everybody is observed by algorithms. And it allows for new possibilities to modelize the social in a completely immanent way, emancipated from all oppressive hierarchies. And that reminds very much Guattari in La Révolution moléculaire, the molecular revolution in 1977. He described asignifying machines as signifying machines are ignore subjects. They ignore subjects, roles, and even delimited objects. This is precisely what gives them a kind of absolute power. They go through all systems of meaning inside which individual subjects recognize themselves and delineate themselves. So you see there, I can introduce a new shift. The target of algorithmic governmentality are not the visible categories anymore, are not the visible minorities. They cannot be even the usual targets of biopolitics, which are the foreigner, the mental disease, criminal, etc. But the target has shifted. The target has become the possible as such, not a specific category, not any visible categories, but the possible as such, who is no one in particular. So the target of governance, of governmentality has shifted from the topological or chronological actuality to the virtual. That's why I suggested in my title the exhaustion of the virtual. And how can it do that? It can do that because of the combinatorial nature of algorithmic governmentality. In a very nice text, Gilles Deleuze, the text is L'épuisé, the exhausted, a comment about Beckett. He says, the combinatorial is the art or science of exhausting the possible through inclusive disjunction. But only the exhausted can exhaust the possible because he has renounced all need, preference, goal, or signification. Only the exhausted is sufficiently disinterested, sufficiently scrupulous. Indeed, he is obliged to replace projects with tables and programs denuded of sense. What matters for him is the order in which to do what he must and following which combinations be able to do two things at once when it is again necessary, etc., etc. So you see, it's the idea of exhaustion which is very much articulated to the combination, to combination. Of course, exhausting the possible is something that is impossible in a way. Impossible in a world of big data where big data become bigger and bigger at each minute. So exhausting all that quantity is quite impossible. The only way to do that is to actualize in advance what is only virtual, what is only possible. So to consider in advance that things that are just not even predicted but guessed by algorithm, to consider them as already happening. So you see, that justifies all the preemptive security strategies, but also in marketing. For example, the patents filed by Amazon for forward shipping. They have a system that allows them to send the goods before they have even been bought by the consumers. You see, that's the question of preemption. So it appears completely egalitarian and democratic for a more technical reason as well. And there I have to describe another shift, how to compare the statistical practices involved in data mining to the classical statistical practices. First, the new statistical practices in that big data and data mining are completely different with regard to the aims of statistics. Usual traditional statistics had as aims first the objectivation of pre-existing hypotheses. The idea of productivity of certain areas of the country, the objectivation of pre-existing hypotheses. Here, of course, hypothesis, the very idea of data mining is is not to have to determine pre-existing hypotheses, but make hypotheses surface from the data themselves. So hypotheses or categories do not pre-exist to the collection and processing of data. Hypotheses and categories are the result of the processing of data. So it's completely different. Another finality of classical statistic is the organization of commensurability. For example, benchmarking. Benchmarking allows to compare otherwise completely incomparable performances. For example, compare the performance of a researcher in physics with the performances of a researcher in law. Okay, so it's completely different, and in that way it allowed people to discuss about things. Here, the goal of algorithmic governmentality is to dispense us from discussing. But more importantly, in traditional statistics, and this is very well described by Robert Musil, who was fascinated by statistics, he said, in statistics, the result of the measure are distributed around the most probable value, which is calculated following the well-known rules of theories of probability. But there is also, underlying all this, another underestimated selection. One excludes the points of data which are situated too far at an excessive distance from the average value as sources of errors and perturbations. Of course, the idea of big data is exhaustivity, non-selectivity. So for that reason, big data productions appear completely objective without selectivity, but also their production escape political struggles. As with traditional statistics, you could always say, well, the statisticians haven't taken enough data or they have taken too much. Also, the normative oppressive character of the normal man or the average man, the very notion of average, which was normative in a way. For Quetelet, normal man was the perfect man, and for Galton, eugenist, the normal was the mediocre. So you see, there was a normative connotation. Here, the normative connotation disappears completely. So it appears very emancipatory. And also, traditional statistics, for that reason, for selectivity reasons, were valid only for great numbers, but they failed to account for singularities of situations. Here, the fact that you can take into consideration all noise, or even the points the more far removed from average, means that you can take into consideration even the more singular. So that means that not willing to be profiled is not willing to be yourself in a way. And in that system, I caricaturize it because I don't have time, but each person becomes its own statistical norm in a way. So it becomes very complicated to contest because, well, it appears objective and it appears to correspond quite well to the dreams of the critical thinking of the 60s and 70s of complete immanence, and as Foucault said, the ambition not to be governed too much or not to be governed by something else than myself. So it's really complicated to contest. But no, well, I don't have time to develop too much. So in conclusion, what I could say very, very quickly is that, well, this mode of government affects us not as subjects capable of thinking, understanding, and will. It affects us as temporary aggregates of intra-individual data which are aggregable at a supra-individual level, so there is no one, in fact. It affects us on the mode of alert, of the mode of stimulus, which generates reflex responses rather than reflexivity. And it affects us by, in marketing at least, by producing our own desires before we are able to desire them, to express them. So what to do? Of course, I'm not against data mining and profiling or these things in general. Artificial curiosity of algorithms and increasingly intelligent algorithms, and well, they become increasingly intelligent thanks to data mining, to machine learning, etc. The artificial curiosity can create new things which may be of interest in a lot of fields like astronomy, epidemiology, etc. It's a way of discovering new knowledge which had escaped our own human perception capacities. But it confuses facts with norms. When these systems are used to modelize the social, it confuses fact with norm because big data ignores all that is not translatable into digital data. It ignores all that has not been effectuated and leaves no trace, like the dreams of our ancestors, for example. They have not written them, or they have not realized them, so they're just forgotten, despite the fact that these can be interesting preserves of thought for emancipation. They forgot their own biases, but I will not have I will not have time to go into this in deep details. So what is needed indeed is really to disenclose the digital, to reopen a distinction between representations and things, in order to allow for disobedience, to escape the performativity of these systems, and to allow people to give account of themselves by themselves, because that's really what distinguishes us as autobiographical animals, to take the word of Derrida. So thank you very much.